This movie is about a man who killed his wife and lost everything he had, but the demon gave him a chance to change something. But in the end, he made the wrong choice and will be doomed to eternal torment in hell. Don't switch. This movie is very interesting and will make you wonder from the context. Nathan wakes up in the middle of the road, realizing he's been in a car accident. His vehicle is wrecked by the roadside, but surprisingly, Nathan doesn't have a single scratch on him. Suddenly, he's startled by Daniel, the biker he collided with. To Nathan's shock, Daniel isn't hurt either. Daniel asks if Nathan remembers getting out of the car, and Nathan admits he doesn't, blaming it on shock and hitting his head on the dashboard. Strangely, Nathan has no wounds and feels no pain. Then, Daniel drops a bombshell: they're actually dead, and what they're seeing are their ghosts. He believes he died first, as he's been there for several minutes. Initially in denial, Nathan refuses to accept this and checks his car. To his horror, he finds the driver's seat completely crushed, and looking closer, he sees his own lifeless body inside. Shocked, Nathan steps back, spiraling into an existential crisis as he thinks about his friends and kids. Daniel mentions missing his wife and finds it odd Nathan hasn't brought up the mother of his children. As Nathan panics, Daniel insists this proves the afterlife exists, only intensifying Nathan's fear. Daniel forces Nathan to face the reality by dragging his body out of the car and covering its face with a handkerchief, making Nathan even more uncomfortable. Just then, a car drives by and stops near the body. Nathan tries to ask for help, but the driver can't see or hear him. The man checks Nathan's body with his foot, ensuring it's dead, then proceeds to rob him before driving away. Finally, Nathan accepts that he's a ghost and wonders if judgment is next. He confesses to killing his wife, but claims it was an act of mercy. Before he can explain further, Daniel hears music around them. Suddenly, a mysterious white door appears, and the area around them is covered in snow. Daniel swears the music is coming from the door, but Nathan hears nothing. As they approach, a red door materializes behind them, looking sinister, with screams echoing from it that only Nathan can hear. They deduce that the white door leads to heaven and the red one to hell, suggesting Nathan is being punished for killing his wife. Panicking, Nathan explains his wife had been gravely ill and he only wanted to end her suffering. Ignoring this, Daniel attempts to cross through the white door, but Nathan pushes him aside and tries to go through first. Nothing happens. Daniel suggests that Nathan should behave better to get a better door, and Nathan apologizes for not seeing Daniel's bike while driving. Daniel, in turn, admits he was distracted by a little girl playing by the roadside. After a heartfelt hug, Daniel tries crossing through the white door again, but nothing happens. He also stops hearing the music. Then, a voice speaks from behind them. The little girl Daniel saw earlier appears, revealing she is also dead. She explains a man on a bike had hit her, prompting Daniel to confess he had been drinking before the crash. Nathan adds that it wasn't just an accident. Daniel had been reckless and killed an innocent child. After a brief argument, they try to guide the girl toward the door, but she has been taught not to trust strangers and begins to scream. They fail to calm the girl down, and Daniel, growing impatient, picks her up and throws her through the white door. The girl vanishes instantly, and the white door disappears along with her. Realizing it's now their turn to cross, Daniel hesitates. Frustrated, Nathan kicks him through the door before once again explaining his situation with his wife. He insists he did nothing wrong and refuses to go through the red door. Suddenly, a monstrous figure appears on the road, carrying souls in its flaming mouth. Terrified, Nathan finally crosses through the red door. Nathan finds himself in hell, surrounded by thousands of unconscious souls. He collapses in shock when he discovers a young girl among them. As he grabs her hand, her memories flood into his mind. The girl, Jean, struggles with sleep due to eerie shadows in her room and her parents' constant arguing. And her mother wants to help her, but her father fears her, believing they need protection from her. Jean blames the shadows on a large tree outside her window. One night, Jean goes downstairs for a snack, making herself a jam sandwich, seemingly happy despite her clumsiness with the knife. Later, she visits her therapist, sharing a story about feeding cookie crumbs to baby birds. The mother bird, worried, flew at her, so Jean reacted by strangling all the birds. She also admits to poking her little sister with pens out of hatred and expresses a desire to harm her parents while they sleep, leading them to lock her in her room every night. When the therapist asks about Jean's actions toward her sister, Jean refuses to talk further. The next morning, Jean demands breakfast, but no one comes. She ends up eating a bowl of cereal, her clothes smeared with blood, while her parents' lifeless bodies lie nearby. After ensuring they are truly dead, she kisses her mother goodbye and makes more bread with jam. Jean then heads to the basement, which resembles a vast cave, where she feeds her friend, Tony, a humanoid yet deformed being. Jean assumes Tony killed her parents, but he denies it. As Tony eats, Jean announces that he can now live with her upstairs since her parents are gone. Tony, amazed by the warm sunlight he's never experienced, wanders around the house. Jean takes him to the bathroom, showing him how to use the bathtub, while she puts on her mother's makeup and jewelry. Tony marvels at the sensation of clean water on his deformed skin. Moments later, Tony dresses in clean clothes that once belonged to Jean's father. Jean asks for his help in moving the bodies, but first, she wants to prepare a surprise as a final goodbye. Using her imagination, Jean sets up a play. With her parents' bodies as the audience, she narrates her story of waking up to no breakfast, pretending an imaginary crowd is laughing at her jokes. Then, she drags Tony onto the stage with a chain, announcing him as the killer who will be executed. Tony, however, denies having killed anyone, claiming he has no memories before appearing in the cave. Jean forces the imaginary audience to vote for Tony's execution, and he is compelled to step onto a stool to hang himself. Afterward, Tony hides the mother's body under the double bed, while Jean gleefully jumps on it, reminiscing about the time she teased her parents with a knife while they slept. Tony then drags the father's body to hide it as well, and in that moment, he realizes that he cannot see his reflection in the mirror. This revelation confirms that he represents Jean's dark side, and that she was the one who killed her parents. Was unable to cook, they settle for cereal and bread with jam for lunch. At that moment, the doorbell rings. Jean answers it to find the mailman, who needs an adult to sign for a delivery. Jean calls out for Tony, but there is no response. The mailman leaves a missed delivery card and departs. Jean desperately searches for Tony, but cannot find him downstairs. As she runs, her eerie drawings are revealed. Eventually, she discovers Tony in her parents' room, feeding on their corpses. Horrified, Jean screams at him to stop as the door shuts behind her. Later, as her toys burn, Jean checks on her younger sister, who is drawing a picture of the murder. Jean tells her sister that Tony is hungry and lures her into the kitchen, where she pushes her oven and turns it on. As Jean leaves the kitchen, she sings happily, with shadows following her along the walls. In hell, Nathan is revolted by what he has just witnessed and crawls away in horror. He comes across a teenage girl and her mother, touching them next. The mother, Julia, is in the kitchen, attempting to make tea while barely holding back her emotions. She calls for her daughter, Chloe, but receives no response. Spotting a dried blood stain on the table, Julia feels even more overwhelmed and tries to scrape it off. Still in denial, she heads to the bathroom and retrieves Chloe's lifeless body from a tub filled with bloody water. She sobs as she drags Chloe's body around like a rag doll, eventually placing her at the kitchen table. Julia serves breakfast to the corpse and speaks of going on a vacation together. A flashback from the previous morning reveals Chloe in the bathtub, trying to stall for time. Julia had reminded her to hurry so they wouldn't be late for school. Chloe, distracted during breakfast, listened to her mother argue with co-workers over the phone while staring at a knife, haunted by memories of being relentlessly bullied at school. Desperate, Chloe pricked her finger with the knife, causing it to bleed and leaving a stain on the table. When it was time to leave, Chloe tried to express that she couldn't endure school any longer, but Julia dismissed her concerns, thinking Chloe was overreacting. In the present, Chloe's body slides off the chair, and a cat appears, licking the blood from her wound. Julia quickly shoos the pet away from Chloe's body and places her in a wheelchair, ignoring the ringing phone. Suddenly, she snaps, declaring that they're going on a trip. Julia rushes to her closet, grabbing a few belongings while on the verge of another breakdown. She wraps Chloe in a blanket, expressing her love and confessing she hadn't always been there for her. Julia then reassures Chloe that she won't have to attend school anymore. She'll be homeschooled. As Julia opens the front door to leave, she is stunned to find it blocked by a brick wall. This triggers a flashback of Chloe hiding in a bathroom stall while being bullied, with the girls taunting her and filming the ordeal. Back in the present, the brick wall is metaphorical, representing Julia's mental barrier. Her neighbor, alarmed by Julia's earlier scream, comes over, panicked. Julia insists they're leaving for a vacation, but the neighbor, sensing something wrong, enters the house and discovers Chloe's lifeless body. Moments later, Julia drives away, Chloe's body strapped into the passenger seat. As she drives, Julia cries, reminiscing about the day Chloe was born and promising her a better life. Julia pleads with Chloe to respond. Growing more desperate, distracted, she crashes into a tree. A flashback reveals that Chloe had taken her own life in the bathtub, and Julia had found her. Julia wakes up after the crash, bleeding and dazed, realizing that firefighters are trying to break into the car to rescue her. She struggles against them, unwilling to leave her daughter behind. While some firefighters carry Julia away, others find Chloe's body and assume she died in the accident. But Chloe is placed in a body bag as Julia screams in agony. In hell, Nathan covers the bodies of the women he has witnessed and collapses from exhaustion. Haunted by the endless tragedies he has seen, suddenly, the devil appears, announcing that it's time to lead Nathan to his punishment. Nathan tries once again to explain that his wife had multiple sclerosis and that he ended her suffering out of mercy, but the devil counters that his wife hadn't been of sound mind and had not consented to euthanasia, making Nathan guilty of her death. The devil guides Nathan into another area, explaining that the first stage of eternal damnation involves semi-isolation, where souls lose all memories of their past lives, becoming pure beings of pain and despair. Nathan passes through a new door and finds himself in a dark room filled with resting souls. The devil informs him that this isolation will last for 4,000 years, a mere prelude to the suffering that will follow. As Nathan panics, the devil seals the entrance and leaves. Suddenly, a blanket stirs, and a decayed soul named Billy emerges. Billy mistakes Nathan for his next target and viciously attacks him, smashing his head and tossing him around without mercy. Nathan endures the beating until he no longer responds. Realizing he has destroyed Nathan's soul, Billy inadvertently forces Nathan into reincarnation. In the real world, a mother gives birth to a healthy baby. Meanwhile, the devil informs Billy that by sending a damned soul back, Billy has unknowingly created the Antichrist. Furious, the devil punishes Billy by decapitating him, explaining that his body will regenerate, and assigns him a new mission to retrieve Nathan's soul. Sometime later, Billy appears in the baby's room, ready to fulfill his dark purpose.